Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. In this video I'm going to talk about the minor blues, because I think that's something that's really sort of a broad topic, and it's kind of hard to really put that into one of the shorter videos that I normally do and when I'm publishing these lessons on Thursday. So I'm going to try to do this a little bit more long form. It's a form where there are like a lot of options, and just to cover some of the possibilities you have in terms of how you play on a minor blues, then it's better to just have a few more examples. I'm going to experiment with also using a backing track when I'm soloing, just to give you an idea about how it all works together. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to talk about the form. So we need to just look at the minor blues and understand how the form works, and where we can sort of make choices in terms of scales and chords and stuff like that. So the basic minor blues, I'm going to use a C minor blues because that's probably the most common key with Mr. PC, and actually mostly Equinox is also played in C minor. So that's what I'm going to use for it. So the form, I'll try and edit in like a picture of the changes. It's first 4 bars of C minor, so, and then it goes to F minor. Sometimes when it goes to F minor, there's a C7 in front of it, so there might be a C7 in the 4th bar. So 2 bars of F minor, then we go back to C minor, and then we get the final 2/5 in a minor blues. So in a major blues, you probably know that the cadence is just a 2/5, in fact, and the minor 2/5 in C would be D half diminished to G7 to C minor. But most of the time we use not the D half diminished, but the tritone substitute of the dominant, of the dominant. So the tritone substitute of a D, so that's an A flat 7 to G7 altered, and then back to C, and then also usually a G7 to go back to the beginning of the form. So as you can tell, there are fewer chords in a minor blues than there is in sort of the normal major blues. And I think also, if you look at it like that, the minor blues is probably something that we connect more with a period that's a little bit later. So it came after the major blues, so you don't find, I'm not sure there are any recordings of Parker playing a minor blues. It's something that you, at least I kind of connected more with sort of 50s, 60s jazz and modal sounds. And that of course also fits with the fact that we have one chord for a longer period of time. And then sort of the part of the improvisation is also working with the fact that you actually have not so much changes that are moving, but you kind of have a sound that's staying for a bit, and then you're gonna approach that sound in different ways. I think the most famous example of that will probably be Mr. PC, with Coltrane playing quite a few different scale sounds on top of that in his solo. I think I'm going to reference that quite a bit. Also, there's a Pat Martino solo on Mr. PC that I'm probably also going to use a little bit as an example. I'll try and link to both of them actually, then you can check them out. They're anyway both the Pat Martino version and also of course Coltrane playing Mr. PC is like great solos and well worth checking out if you're not familiar with them already. So the scales that normally go along with the chords in the minor blues, well, we have our C minor, and that's really open to interpretation. You'll find that I think the two most used ones will be Melodic Minor and Dorian, and then there are certainly many more options, and I'll try and cover some of them, but for the rest I'll just leave that for now, and then I'll start working on that when we get to that. So we're just looking at the basic choices here. The F minor is sometimes, is 9 out of 10 times will be played as a Dorian sound also. And you could use melodic minor, but it's not so common, mainly because if you use melodic minor, so F melodic minor, then so this type of sound, then you have the major third of the tonic in there, and that's a strange combination in the context, so you don't hear that very often. But it does happen, of course, but it's not so common. And then we go back to C minor, so again we have all sorts of choices for C minor in terms of Dorian and Melodic Minor, Harmonic Minor. And then we get the final cadence, so the A flat 7 is a tritone dominant, so that's a Lydian dominant. And the G7 is played, well, it's a dominant that resolves to minor, so, or it's a harmonic minor type sound, so C harmonic minor, or you play altered. I think for the period somehow. It's a little bit also when they started using altered scale really, so you'll find a lot of altered lines on that dominant as well. And then back to C minor, and of course another G7, and then we kind of have the main scale choices. And probably what I'm going to talk most about in this video is going to be on the different ways to play the tonic minor chord. And that's kind of also coming out of the fact that now we're moving into jazz music that's kind of evolved from just playing the changes to something where we're starting to experiment with the modal sound and different sounds on top of chords. And that's also why you see like a 12-bar blues, a minor blues has 4 bars of tonic in the beginning. So we really have some space to really explore different sounds on top of those 4 bars. And that becomes the main focus. And you can also really tell that that's happening with both Mr. PC from Coltrane and also from Pat Martino. So the different scale choices that I'm gonna sort of talk about with this are gonna be first and foremost the melodic minor, which is, I think, well, especially for Coltrane, that I know actually he uses most of the time he's using melodic minor, even though the theme Mr. PC is not in melodic minor. It's more, that's actually Dorian, I guess. It's not really clear if it's Dorian or Aeolian, but at least it's not melodic minor. The next sound is Dorian. So Dorian is of course also used really a lot from that period on, and where melodic minor was something that we already had really a lot in bebop, Dorian was something that came in with just with modal playing from both some of the Coltrane stuff and certainly also from Miles Davis kind of blue. So there's something to be said for checking out that and using that. That's also a very sort of common sound. The next thing that I want to talk about is just playing blues phrases, because that is something that's being done as well. You'll see that I think Coltrane doesn't really do that. Pat Martino does do that, and he kind of does it in 2 different ways. So that's something I want to talk about. I want to also go over some of the more exotic scale choices that you have available, because that's always fun to have sort of at the end of the solo some other options. Reinterpreting the chords, and there are 2 things that are quite common. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well and how that works. And then I'm going to try to, of course, incorporate backing tracks a bit. We'll see how that works. These first 2 choruses are just to give you an idea about how it sounds if I solo using melodic minor on the first 4 bars, or actually in general on all the tonic minor chords. And of course the sound that you would associate with the tonic minor would be like so the minor major or the minor 6 type sound. And the way you make lines of this, of course, when you want to emphasize a sound like that, so what's really sort of the distinct features here are that we have the B and the A, so the major 7 and the major 6 on top of the minor chord. And you want to emphasize those, and you want to have them sort of very present in the lines you play if you want to spell those out. And I think that's also important that when you're working with this thing that you're using different sounds for the chords all the time, then you want to be really aware of what sounds you want to pull out, and you want to emphasize those notes and have lines that really sort of pull those out and really lean on those sounds, because that makes it clear, and that's also going to make it easier to get a contrast between this sound and Dorian, because actually Dorian and melodic minor are the same notes except for 1. So I think for me the thing that's sort of the main feature with the melodic minor is of course the major 7, because that's the note that's different, and then also the combination of the augmented triad in there. So the things I chose to use, so here I was a little bit more on the scale side in the solo that I just played, but I'm just going to talk about some different arpeggios that you can use for this, because I think that's a good place to start. If you want to get some lines out that will work with this sound, play some different arpeggio structures. If you run up and down the scale, it gets difficult to really pull stuff out. The first arpeggio that is useful is of course just the C minor major arpeggio. So that's of course something to really use to pull it out. Another one that's also being used very often is the one from the third. So that's a E flat major 7 sharp 5. And I think if you're trying to get used to this type of sound, then I would say like put down like a minor 6 chord and then just try and make some really sort of simple basic lines where you're mixing up the melodic minor scale with one of those arpeggios. So in this case I'm using the E flat major 7 sharp 5. And then be aware that you want to hit these notes especially. So the major 7 and the major 6. So those are sort of two sort of really basic arpeggios that you can use. Another thing that I like to use a lot, that I also made a few videos on, is to use triad pairs. So traditionally, the triad pairs that everybody sort of turn to first is going to be 2 major triads, probably just because they're easy to find. And in C melodic minor, the 2 major triads that you have next to each other are F and G, which they work well, but you kind of miss the third. At least that's what I think. So the ones that I use the most on a tonic minor are probably going to be, I use the F, and then instead of taking the G, I take the E flat augmented, so you get, and then just try and make some melodies with that. So and see how you can sort of come up with some stuff like that. So that's definitely something to check out, I think. And you can always look for different triad pairs. It can actually be nice because you can kind of find your own favorite triad pair, and then you'll have a little bit of different sound than everybody else because there are quite a few options. Another good one would be to take the G and then the A diminished triad. So that will work as well. Really, it's just something you can experiment with and then try and use what's there. And I don't think you're kind of selling yourself short by just using sort of F and G all the time, or the 2 major triads next to it. Not that that doesn't work, of course you can use those as well, but the other ones are there, and you might as well just try and see what kind of sound you get. I really like the one I'm using here. It's something that I think is a very sort of nice sound to have in there. Let's see, what else do we have? Sometimes you can look for sort of quartal arpeggios that you can use. I mean, of course, you can play like the melodic minor scale in stacks of fourths, which is always a good exercise, of course. But you can also look for like other sort of more obvious or less obvious quartal arpeggios, and then just take one out and see if you can make some lines with it. So the first one that I played in the tonic series here, which I mean really spells out some sort of F13. And just, you can of course try different things out. Like I think now I'm combining it with a scale, so, or maybe the triad pair. So now this is like the stack of fourths, and then G major first inversion triad, and then an F major second inversion. So here I'm actually using those two because we already have sort of the sound spelled out from the Quartal Arpeggio. So that's definitely something to check out. And yeah, I mean there are of course a lot more options. I think maybe I shouldn't try and cover all options in terms of arpeggios that we have here. I have other videos where I talk about this. I'm not sure if I have one for tonic minor actually, but that is something that that is worth exploring. It's good to just look at not only the diatonic arpeggios, but you want to start there, and if you have an overview of those, then look for what else is there. Something else that I use a lot is the what's it called, the dominant 7 sharp 5. So you have two dominant 7 sharp 5 arpeggios in C melodic minor. One is on the 5th, so the G, and one is on the 7th, which is the B, which is kind of also where you get like B all to the C melodic minor. So the B one is really nice because when you have that on top of the C, you kind of have all the good notes together. So you have the E flat that you need to get the minor sound, and then you have the major 6 and the major 7. So that one I use quite a lot. Mainly just because it's a little bit sort of the characteristic notes put together in a 4-note structure. And you can also explore, there are going to be something, I'm going to make a video about that sometimes. There are some pentatonic scales that will work well for this as well. The other most common choice is of course to play Dorian on a minor blues for the first 4 bars. And if you really want to emphasize the Dorian sound, then the thing you need to kind of have in there is that you have a major 6, and then also kind of that you have the flat 7, because if you just hear this and you hear this sound, then most of us will actually hear that as a melodic minor sound. So the minor 13 kind of sound is what you want to take out there. And yeah, making lines with that is really about just making some sort of statement with the A on top. I think isn't that the West solo in Impressions is also starting with this, I think. So that's also what I'm doing here. I'm really using the E flat major flat 5 and E flat major, and then using that as a melodic sort of tool to mess around with, and then of course taking that to the F minor. So those are sort of the basic things that that you can do if you want to pull out the Dorian sound. For the rest, it becomes really quickly, just to me anyway, very you can play it as a sort of nondescript or not very characteristic minor sound. Because it doesn't have any real avoid notes, and if you don't really land on the major 6, or really use that as a 13 in fact, then you don't really hear what it is. It could be a lot of things. The same way that I talked about Mr. PC is probably Dorian, but actually the melody just doesn't really have a 6 in it on the minor chord, so you can't really tell. It's just minor with a flat 7. That's the only thing you really know. That's a little bit how that works. I think the material you would want to use on this, so of course you can use like minor pentatonic even, like, but then you're missing the 13, and then I think what I really connect a lot with Dorian is also again sort of the quartal harmony sound, which is also, I think I used that in the solo as well, this chord voicing with a minor 13. So that's something I would use a lot. And as you can tell, or I don't know if you can tell, but at least I keep noticing that when I'm playing Dorian, I'm still using a leading note like this. And to me that's a little bit different, because I'm not in the same way spelling out melodic minor when I'm doing that, because it is just a leading note, and I'm not going, which for me would be like spelling out the melodic minor sound. So yeah, so that way it's like you're still allowed to use that note, but it is a leading note now. It's not something that you go, okay, here we're really in melodic minor. So that's something that what I use here is probably the quartal harmony thing, and different ways of doing this. So actually what I use for melodic material when I'm trying to spell out the 13 sound is really gonna be really almost these chords. So was what I think I start the solo with this. Something along those lines. That's one way to really bring that sound out. And here I'm just using it melodically, really. That's what's going on. Because there are not really that many options. We don't have a ton of arpeggios, and certainly no diatonic arpeggios that will give us an E flat, B flat, and an A. So that's a little bit the problem we get with sort of having structures that will work for this. The quartal harmony does have this one, and then you use that a lot. You still just use the normal things that you would use, so it's still gonna be like C minor, the arpeggio from the third, which is E flat, of course different kinds of arpeggios, so shell voicing. So E flat major 7, drop 2. And then, so what I'm doing here is I'm really stating C minor, and then really bringing out the 13 sound at the end. And then you can of course just experiment with different types of minor 13 voicings. I have a whole video on minor 13 chord voicings and how you should use them, so you can maybe check that out and use that. And actually you can translate the voicings, because the same way that I'm doing that with the drop 2 voicings, you can also do that with those voicings and try and use them in the solos, which is actually what I do quite a lot with these. That's the one option. The other option would be like I did here, where you're first stating the basic color of the chord, which would be, for instance, like a C minor 7 with a 9, which is of course just going to be an E flat major 7 arpeggio. And then pull out the 13. Another one that's also a good option here in terms of triad pairs, since I had that for the first one, would be to play, well, the two ones that you have sort of next to each other here would be the E flat and the F, which of course could work. I think the one that I use the most for this sound is probably the E flat combined with the D minor. You can even do this, what I just did, with some nice sort of symmetrical way of moving it across the neck, like, which is continuing like first E flat major root position, and then second inversion D minor, and you get another root position, second inversion. Those kind of sounds will work well. Of course, the minor blues is a blues still, so you can also use just the blues sound on it. And I think, I'm not sure, but actually I think the whole idea with the last cadence being A flat 7 to G7 is actually just to give us an excuse to really use the blue note. Because that's in the A flat, that's like the 7th in the A flat. And you can hear that also in Mr. PC with the... So the melody really has the G flat in there. And yeah, for the rest, I mean, I think you can find a lot of places where the blues is used quite extensively on minor chords. I think mostly, and I've talked about this before in some of the other videos about mixing jazz and blues, that the main thing here is, I mean, now we're using minor, so we're a little bit restricted. We can't really use things that are not normally there already, because the minor pentatonic scale, except for the flat 5, is already in the sound that we're playing. And That means it's really about the melodies, and then using the flat 5, which also you can hear in the solo, that I'm really trying to just use that sound a lot, because that's, and for the rest it is really phrasing, so it is about playing the blues type phrasing. Of the solos that I mentioned with Coltrane and Pat Martino, probably the Pat Martino one has a few really sort of clear blues phrases and blues choruses kind of in there, where I don't think Coltrane really has that at that point. I think he was really busy with other things. But that otherwise, you also, if you check out Pat Metheny playing on a minor blues or actually on a minor chord, he will have periods where he really just plays really blues sounds, and he also very consciously uses this as a sound, as just another way of approaching a minor chord. That's quite clear, which is a good way to think about it, I think. So mostly it's about the type of phrases, and you really just have to hear blues phrasing and be able to play a bit of blues phrasing to have that, and for the rest it's just a minor pentatonic with an extra note. That's really all there is to it. So here it's not so much about using, at least I don't really think in terms of using specific arpeggios or using that. I really just think blues as a sound, and that is more for me a type of phrasing than it's actually a certain choice in notes. So I would also probably be playing like some of the other things that will work in there. So using the major 6 in a blues context, to me has a little bit of a B.B. King, Robin Ford type of sound. But yeah, so really thinking about how I play the notes and what type of melodies and stuff like that, like repeated notes and shorter phrases, slides, that kind of thing, more than the actual note choices, because that's a better definition of blues for me anyway. So of the more sort of exotic scale choices, the one that I used in this example is the Augmented Scale. What you hear here is, of course, that mostly I'm using it. Actually, I do use it also on the second time you have the C minor, but mostly this is the kind of thing you want to use when you have really C minor for some period of time, because it's going to sound outside, and it's only going to really work if you have the time to really sort of have an established idea of what the C minor sound is, and then that you get the other sound on top of it. So the augmented scale that I'm using here is actually, I guess you would call an E flat augmented or G augmented, because it's the combination of an E flat major triad, a G major triad, and a B major triad. And that's the basic idea of what I'm doing here. So I'm starting sometimes, well, I think the first time I'll start with just some stuff that's C minor really, so, and then I go into augmented material where I use that. So, and that's really just mostly for me the combination of the triad is what I'm looking for with this. At one of the points I'm also doing the, just because that's sort of the clearest sort of signal way to play that sound, I think. So that's really what this is. And playing the scale is actually just this, because the augmented scale is just two augmented triads next to each other. So in this case it's the G augmented triad next to the F sharp or G flat augmented triad. And then you can of course look at those 6 notes and then find different structures in it. The things that I use the most is the triads for sure. The other thing that you will use a lot in there is that it actually has augmented, what's that called? That's called major 7 sharp 5 chords from all the triads in there. So you also have the E flat major 7 sharp 5, the G major 7 sharp 5, and the B major 7 sharp 5. these types of things. So that's the other thing that you want to have. To me, sort of what's really characteristic about this sound is that you have a minor sound, and it's minor major, but it also has a sharp 11. So it's kind of this sound, which is like a G major 7 sharp 5 over a C. Of course, we don't have the C in the scale, which again, this is a synthetic scale, and it's a special effect sound. So that's also how you treat it, and that means that this is the sound, even though the scale that we're using then it's only containing the top part of what is going on. We don't actually have the root in there. Yeah, for the rest, I mean, you would probably only use this, at least it would work most effectively if you're using in the sort of first 4 bars. I think that's where that kind of belongs, and you can experiment with it. It's going to work as a sound that you establish on top of it. I find that sort of the sharp 11 thing is the thing you want to spell out. So that's also why when the first thing I play is actually, I think this. I'm not sure if I played ascending or descending, but I'm really playing that B major triad to get this out there, and that's gonna give me that sound. So that's what I'm aiming for. And then the G and the E flat are still kind of closely connected to the C minor. So I'll use those as well, but I will really lean more on the F sharp, and especially just the B major triad, because that's that sound. So I'm not going to do examples for all the different scales that I know in terms of the more exotic choices, but I'm just going to mention them just the same because I think that seems fair. So the first one that I rarely use, but which certainly should be mentioned, which isn't actually even outside or that exotic, is the Harmonic Minor Scale. So C Harmonic Minor, I rarely play that, and actually in jazz it rarely has a place as a tonic minor sound. It's mostly reserved for the dominant, for dim chords. But that doesn't mean you can't use it, of course. So you can still say, well, I'm going to take a chorus and go. And it's nice to have that because you have a different sound that you can put in there. And this is also about, I mean, this is where we actually start using the different chord sounds and the extensions and the scales that we use as a way of improvising. And you need to know them all. It's a little bit like knowing all your diatonic arpeggios over any chord, or knowing exactly what you can use over F major 7, so you might not like to play D minor arpeggios over an F major 7, but you still should have it available. And this is actually one of those things where, even though you don't want to use it, this is part of the vocabulary and you want to check it out. So for that, it can be useful to just have a few ideas on what you should do if you want to play sort of a C minor sound that has a harmonic minor flavor to it. So that's one of them. Of the other ones that I also do use once in a while, I guess the Wholetone Scale works really well. So the idea here is that if you have a C minor major sound, then similar to what we did with the augmented, you can look at this augmented sound and then make that independent, and then just choose a scale that fits that, and then just ignore the fact that it's a C that's under it. And one of the things that fits well with this augmented triad is, of course, and then you can use that on top of this sound. You can kind of hear how that will sort of, it has sort of parts that are inside and parts that are outside in a sort of nice way. Plus the Wholetone Scale just has a really distinct sound, which is useful when you're trying to use different sounds on top of something, and that works really well. So that I use sometimes. I'll use Diminished Scale on top of minor chords as well. The Diminished Scale that I would use here is, of course, the C diminished, simply. So that means that I'm using a scale that doesn't have a perfect fifth. I would be using. So basically I'm just playing sort of a maybe B7 13 over C under it, and then use the same stuff that I would use if it was like a B7 going to E minor. And I mean, I've made other videos about how I play diminished dominance and stuff. I'll try and link to some of them in the description also. Well, usually I end up doing, as I mostly do with the diminished scale is and actually also the other ones that I tend to focus more on the structures in the scale than the scale itself. So I think more in terms of material that's sort of connected. I have melodic ideas that are collections of triads that I'm sort of tying together. So in this case, that would be like the D, the F, the A flat, and the B major triad on top of C root. And to me, that's then just thinking this sound. Really, it's not that. Maybe that's also worth mentioning. This is something where I don't think individual triads. I've just practiced this so that I can sort of hear and connect those triads. Because if you have to think of all of them, then you don't have time for that. So you kind of need to have that all already tied together. So another thing that we can start sort of getting into is to have other chords that we play on top of the progression to get a different sound out of it. And that means that we're actually using the same notes, but we're emphasizing certain notes, and the combination of sort of one type of sound in the accompaniment, so in this case that's just the bass playing like a C minor bass line, and then us playing something else. And in the example I just played, I'm using the F7. So what I talked about, like if you look at a C minor 6 like this, then that's the same as an F7. And if I really start focusing not so much on it being an F7 as I'm just really using the F sound on top of the C minor, it's not gonna really, it doesn't clash because they're not really notes that don't fit with the harmony. But somehow when I'm playing melodies that are emphasizing especially the A and the F, then I'm sort of creating another focus point in the harmony, and the combination of the C accompaniment and then the sort of really F sound in the melodies work really well. And in this case, I think it's so strong because the F sound that I'm playing is just so. I mean, you really have to keep this really basic, so you can't just play like the. Nobody can hear if I'm thinking C minor or if I'm thinking F7 here. So what you need to do when you want to have this working, then you really want to play really basic F type lines, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'm almost going down to just playing like F major pentatonic, but so here I went to the F minor, of course. So, but it's really just country. Yeah, well, actually, it is like country and western kind of simple triad F material that you're using on top of that, and then you get this sound that's really this type of sound, I guess, and or maybe this type of sound. And it's just a different sound to pull out. In the Papantino solo, he really does this at some point. There's like a few choruses where he really starts playing stuff that's very much leaning on F and A, and you kind of need to have material that's like that. So you have to do, as I mentioned, like you can't do just your standard bob lines because they're too vague, really, and you have to be more specific, and you really have to. This actually kind of ties in again with the thing that I talked about with the melodic minor and the Dorian sound. That if you really want to pull out the sound, you're actually quite limited in what note you can play. Of course, being limited to a few notes is really not necessarily a huge problem because you can still make melodies with a few notes, and as we all know, you can make a lot of melodies with a very small amount of notes. So in that way, that's not so important. But here it's like you're kind of restricting yourself to just playing around with the basic F triad, maybe using like the D and the E flat a little bit. But yeah, you have to really emphasize sort of the core F major sound to sort of use this. And then a similar thing. Well, actually, maybe that's not so similar, because what we're doing here is, of course, we're taking another part of what is already contained in the sound, and then just putting that on top and really emphasizing that to get a different sound of this, because essentially what I'm playing here could also be considered Dorian. It would fit scale-wise. but you have to look at the melodies I play to see that it's actually not Dorian, which is also similar to the thing that's happening with using blues. Maybe that's actually a really good point and something to talk about here also, because this really shows that it's not really about what notes you're playing, it's really about what melodies and how you use the notes that are there. So I can probably play bluesy using Dorian, and I can probably play like this F7 sound, and I can also play Dorian just using the same scale, but there are three quite different sounds, and it has to do with how I phrase and the type of melodies that I make more than it has to do with the notes that are there. And this is something that I think a lot of jazz guitar players get lost in. Now we have to have these notes, and as long as we play those notes, then it's all fine. Which is the same as I want to play diminished scale on dominant, but if you're just playing, then yeah, that's not going to be, well, that's going to be a little bit boring quite quickly. You can do it once or twice maybe in a solo, but you know, you need to take it a bit further. You need to really know how to play that sound, and you need to figure out for yourself exactly what notes do you want to sort of have springing out and being really clear in the lines that you're doing, and then you have to emphasize those notes, and you have to be able to make good melodies where those notes are the ones that are really being pulled out. And this is definitely something to think about in any situation. And this is just a good example of how you can actually use that ability to take one scale and get different sounds out of it. So that's for the F7. So another thing that's also using a different chord, but here we're using a different sound. If you have a C minor blues, then just before you go to F minor, it's quite common to just add a little C7 to just sort of signal that now we're moving to another chord. So you'll be playing like. The way the C7 is working in the example that I just played is just a short signal that's telling us now we're going to the F minor. So we have sort of spent a few bars establishing a C minor sound, and then before we move on, we just have a short phrase that's just going to tell us that we're going from this to resolve to the F minor, and that's kind of what's happening with that. And you can be more free with that. I think it's also just common for this whole period where the whole sound of the chord is being opened up, and because we have longer periods on one chord, then you can sort of pull out different things. And one of the things that then happens is that we have the short C7, and maybe we can just expand on it and give it more room. That's another way of treating the C differently, in fact. And that means that you can maybe play it for 2 bars. If you take a song like Solar, which is really a minor blues, then there it has like a complete cadence to the F minor, and it's like a 2-bar cadence. So of course that will work as well. So that could be a thing to do. But what really would work also is to just say, well, if you're a little bit late in the solo, you already established the sort of the form for the people listening, even if they're not conscious about exactly what chords are where and what you're doing, then they still have a sense of the sort of way the form is rolling, and they can feel like, okay, we expect tonic here, and this is the beginning of the piece and stuff. So if you decide to, instead of playing the tonic minor, you just play 4 bars of C7 altered, then you're actually kind of already starting with pointing towards the 4, and where we expect sort of a resolution and top of the form, we get this sound that's not stable and is pulling somewhere. And because it's just the dominant resolving to the F minor, we have a really easy way of just resolving it and getting back home in a very natural way. And that's a very powerful thing to do. So that way of thinking is a very sort of simple way of still having a line that you can, like melodic material that you can think of as being and easily play with, because it's just playing C7 also for 4 bars, which is not necessarily that difficult. So instead of having that, let's see if we do something like that could maybe work. So here I'm just playing really C7 altered, and just using that material for 4 bars, and and then resolving that to the F minor, which I think is it's a nice way to do that. It's a little bit hard to demonstrate it without having the backing track actually, but that way of thinking. Of course, you can also turn it into like a long G minor 7 to C7 or something like that. There are a ton of options for this, or even other chords just leaning into the F minor. But that's maybe for another discussion. I think that's going to be too much to just cover in this, because this video already has a lot of material. So so that's something to do as well. Just playing with how much space does this chord actually get. And how you work with it. And of course you don't have to do all such. You can do C7 dominant as a diminished type sound, so you really use like, which might be even more effectful because it's in a way even further away. So yeah, so those are some of the options that you can have for tonic minor, and I think this is something that you can really explore. I think there are several sort of benefits to thinking about this. This is also something you want to apply to. I mean, if you're listening to sort of more normal, or not normal, more modern renditions of standards, then this is also something that's being used. So mess around with the harmony and not play the same sound on all the chords all the way through. So this part of playing different sounds on the different chords along the way is something that's really part of the tradition and the language for modern jazz, and therefore also worthwhile checking out. And it has, I mean, I think it was already there in bebop also, because in bebop you'll hear Parker do blues and changes on top of each other, and sometimes he'll play a flat 9 on dominant, sometimes he won't do that. I mean, it's already sort of coming in that area, and then it's just further developed and explored, I think especially Coltrane, but I mean also all the other cats running around like Bill Evans, and Jim Hall is also a master of doing this. There's a lot of stuff with like Jim Hall and Paul Desmond. There's a whole series of albums with that quartet that has some really nice things in terms of that, where Jim Hall is doing some very interesting things with the harmony also, and they're really worthwhile checking out. But this, of course, that's in a standard. This is just on a minor blues. I think the reason why I want to talk about it here is because it's so clear in the examples also that different things are happening with, especially I think with Mr. PC, the idea that the theme is definitely not melodic minor, and Coltrane is immediately using, I think he's specific, something like that. So really that sound on the minor chord, I think that's important to emphasize that here we're letting go of the harmony that's spelled out by the melody and just starting to reinterpret the harmony right away. And that means also minor blues is a good place to start with it. You have the room, you don't have to play the song in tempo 378, you can just play it a little bit more medium and try and explore it in that way. Yeah, so those are some of the options. If you have other good options that you want to share with us, then leave a comment on the video. I'm certainly always interested in what you guys use and what ideas you have, and what you think about this approach. If you use this approach at all, I think you should. I think it's part of, as I said, it's part of the tradition, so it's something that you need to know, just like you need to know your drop 2 voicings and your diatonic arpeggios. For the rest, if this is the first time you see one of my videos, then feel free to subscribe to my channel. This is the kind of thing that I do. I explore stuff with jazz, and I've been making these videos and these lessons, and also just stuff discussing different things in terms of jazz guitar harmony and music theory for quite some time. So there's already really a lot of stuff on my channel, and if that's what interests you and you also maybe have something to say, then your comments are more than welcome. It's nice to get some input from other people. So yeah, so if you're interested in stuff like that, then please subscribe to my channel. If you want to help me keep making all these videos, then check out my Patreon page. I have a small community on Patreon where they support me financially and help me get the time to make all these videos, and they are really a core part of the reason why I can keep on spending all this time making videos, because of course I need to spend time figuring out what to do, and also just recording and editing and all these videos. So I'm very grateful for my patrons helping me with that. For the rest, if you want to stay up to date with what is going on my channel, then you can click the little bell icon next to the subscribe button. Then you'll get a push notification on your phone, or an email notification when I publish a new video, so you're always up to date with what's going on. That's it for this week. There's a new lesson on Thursday, and until next week.